The SAPOA Annual Convention and Property Networking 2022 conference is taking place this week in the Northwest with the purpose of encouraging engaging conversations and deliberation on issues of pertinence with the commercial property sector. Hello and welcome to this episode of Focus on SAPOA. I'm Warwick Peterson. Today I'll chat to two of the prominent speakers at the event, Andrew Koning, President of SAPOA and CEO of Redefine, and independent Economist Dr Thabi Leoka. Joining me now is Andrew Koning. Welcome. Now, Andrew, how has Redefine adapted sustainable development goals into their properties?
So Warwick, for us at Redefine, the sustainable development goals go to the heart of our ESG strategy. And unfortunately, we can't be all things to all people. So what we have focused specifically on are 8 of the 17 sustainable development goals. And if you like, I can just run through them very quickly, and it will give you a sense as to why we chose those 8. The first one is SDG number 3, which is good health and well-being. 5, which is gender equality. 7, affordable and clean energy, which is very appropriate in these times. 8, decent work and economic growth. 9, industry innovation and infrastructure. 11, sustainable cities and communities. Once again, in South Africa, a very important aspect of our business in terms of embracing the communities in which we operate as well. 13, extremely important, climate action, something we all talk about on a daily basis. And then lastly, 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions, which we all know underpins an equal society.
Andrew, let's speak a bit about the spaces. Can you explain the type of spaces owned by Redefine that embraces technological advancements and innovation?
So for us, it's important that our 3 key sectors, being retail, office, and industrial, are relevant to our user needs, and are clearly technology underpins that. And with technology, we're talking here about both the user experience as well as us as landowners or landlords are able to better manage that space to the benefit of the user ultimately. So in a retail environment, as you know, technology is absolutely important from a Wi-Fi point of view, from a internet access and a shopping point of view, from enabling a safe environment similarly, from managing footfall, security, and those measures. And then in an office environment, what is especially important in these times and very critical is efficiency, space optimization, utilization and of electricity, for example, consumption management of water, which is absolutely important. All of these aspects of property management are enabled through being smart and through technology.
Now, Andrew, that's great that you touched on the property management, because load shedding has been such a horrific experience that affected a lot of businesses. So I want to ask you, how have these properties adapted to the increase in load shedding in recent times?
So first and foremost, for us, Warwick, consumption management is absolutely important. So responsible usage of a scarce resource is first and foremost our priority. But with that, we also have backup generation. But I must add that backup generation is a temporary solution. It is expensive. For example, for Redefine to generate a kilowatt of electricity using diesel generation, backup facilities cost us about 10.53 Rand. Now, just to give an example, if you procure that same kilowatt from the city of Johannesburg, it will cost us as Redefine about 1.35 Rand. So it's very expensive. We've been utilizing during this recent spate of load shedding diesel to the extent of 1.5 million Rand per day, which is extremely expensive and unsustainable. But what we are focusing on, Warwick, is bringing us to a point where we are not absolutely reliant on the grid in terms of renewable energy. We have a solar PV fleet at the moment that generates approximately 10% of our electricity consumption, and we are anticipating to grow that to around 20% over the next couple of years. That will take time to roll out, and then ultimately we also want to move to wheeling, that is to be supplying off our buildings electricity to support the grid. And I'm very pleased to say that in Cape Town we have got a pilot project at a distribution warehouse in Cape Town that will be our first attempt at wheeling.
Now, Andrew, we've also adapted and we are leaning towards innovative ways in terms of working. So the future of work is leaning towards hybrid work. How do companies use their workspaces to its full potential, regardless of the workspace not reaching full in-person capacity?
So Mark, what we are seeing at the moment is basically a hybrid situation where most companies, and I'm generalizing now, but most companies looking at a 2-day work remotely and 3 days at the office. The difficulty is no one quite has settled down into which of the days are they going to be at the office and which aren't they. I know the natural default is Mondays and Fridays, which is not always convenient from a management perspective. But be that as it may, what we're finding in the space environment at the moment is there was this initial contraction in terms of space requirements, but people are slowly starting to realize that in a post-pandemic environment, people want a lot more space around themselves. They no longer want the close confined space that they were previously being subjected to. We are finding in our own experience that most people now, when they book a meeting room, they double up on the space requirements, not for the number of people, but just to have that extra space from a well-being perspective. And in a post-COVID environment, I think we've all got accustomed to a little bit more space around us and some privacy too. I think the days of the big open plan offices could well reverse as a consequence of individuals wanting a bit of privacy, but more importantly, that extra space. So I don't think the space issues in office are dictated to by a changing work environment. I think it's more about economic situations driving lack of demand, which is really the issue for us.
Now, Andrew, Redefine has recently claimed a second green bond issued by SA REIT. How will this assist reducing carbon emission and water consumption within your properties?
So for us, Mike, ESG is at the heart of everything that we do. And what this green bond enables us to do is to introduce climate smart and sustainability real estate interventions. And yeah, we're talking about renewable energy in the form of solar PV on our roofs. We're talking about smart metering to monitor both electricity as well as water consumption. Unfortunately, one can't make water. So what one has to do is be vigilant around every drop of water that you consume and to promote and create an awareness around that. So those are our direct interventions, but more broadly, we're also looking at technological interventions to ensure that we have our finger at the pulse of every aspect of consumption and efficiency.
Andrew, very, very, very interesting. Thank you, Andrew Koning, President of SAPOA and CEO of Redefine. And let's now hear from independent economist Dr Thabi Leoka, who talks at the event is on the topic, the damaging effects of South Africa's unsustainable property rates regime. Thank you for joining us, Thabi.
It's a pleasure.
Can you explain how property rates will be calculated in 2023?
So it's a difficult one because it all depends on inflation and it also depends on the market. So if we're seeing, market in terms of properties increasing in certain areas, then it will likely influence the increase of rates. And also rates are determined by municipalities as well. So when municipalities raise funds, they will also raise rates. And so it is determined by a few factors that will be inputs to rates in 2023.
And which type of land will see the most stability for the investment and resale?
It's typically land that is developed. So land that is in a developed area. The Western Cape has been doing very well, and Stats SA is going to release a property survey. They're currently working on it, but this property survey is going to reveal some interesting dynamics in land and on properties around the country. So far, we're seeing that there's a huge increase in the value of land and the value of properties in the Western Cape, for instance, but there's also movement in your townships such as Soweto, and that needs to be looked into deeper because there are other townships like Mdantsane and Ulundi where research hasn't really focused on. But the land that is typically on the increase in terms of value is land that is in areas that are affluent, in areas that are developed, in areas where there's, prices go up, and so it is lucrative to invest in those areas. And that's why it doesn't surprise me that areas such as the Western Cape, and I can imagine it's around the sea, that you see increases in the value of land that is higher than in the rest of the country.
Now, Thabi, let's touch some on interest on rate calculations. Can you substantiate why you describe property rates calculations as a damaging and unsustainable regime?
So it's an interesting question because it is, it varies from region to region, and sometimes it does go higher than, let's say, household affordability. And it also is linked to what services, let's say, municipalities provide to communities. So let's start with affordability, for instance. It seems as if there's increases in rates are going much higher than increases in income. And so you're squeezing the household, you're squeezing consumers who can ill afford. And information from Experian has also shown that it is not just those who are in the lower income bracket, but actually affluent South Africans are finding it very difficult to afford and to also are increasingly defaulting. So which also tells me that increases in rates is actually very punitive, not just for the poor, but also for the rich. Increases should also go with development. So I think that many people, if let's say we can all afford, increases should go with development. So we should see improvement in our roads, in our sewage collection, in electricity, and services such as the servicing of lights on the street. And so that is also a factor in terms of whether the calculation makes sense or not.
And how will fluctuating property rates impact homeowners, especially during this period of economic turmoil?
So it does, it does impact property owners, especially those who are looking for properties. We did see properties decline slightly during the initial COVID years of 2020 and 2021. But then there seems to be an increase in property prices at the moment. And also there's an influence of inflation that is also impacting on the value of properties. Now, if there is a stock and a lot of stock and not enough buyers, that is a problem because then it leads to devaluation of those properties. But at the same time, if there's just affordability is an issue and people cannot afford these very high prices, there's also going to be a problem with moving property stock. The other issue is that we are, it also varies. The picture is very different all over the country depending on the affordability and the type of property. And it also varies between residential and commercial property as well. So it's really at the crux of it is affordability. At the crux of it is also the rate of inflation that is increasing these prices, and also the fact that we all know that income growth in the past years has been slow, and there's this incongruency between the rate at which property is increasing and also the decline in growth of income, which is, creating this gap in terms of sellers and buyers.
As we see in Cape Town, many generational property owners are being forced out of their homes because of the land being considered prime property. Explain the link between property rates and prime property, and furthermore, how is government involved, or how can they intervene?
Yes, it's an unfortunate one, because I think that government has not done enough, and you see it in other countries where government has actually protected those who have historically occupied that land, and also people who are citizens of the country. And I say this only because, given South Africa's history and given how unequal our society is, there should be some level of protection until there's correction in affordability. And right now, what you are seeing, especially in certain areas like the Western Cape and Eastern Cape along the coast, is that property prices are being determined by foreign buyers who can afford these properties. And so what is property developers are doing is that they prefer, obviously, those who can afford and those who can increase the value of properties, but at the expense of those who are not as wealthy and those who've occupied those properties or that land historically. So we need to find a fine balance. And I think that for a country like South Africa, history is very important, because we are trying to correct the ills of the past, but at the same time, we want South Africa to be an attractive investment destination. So we need to find a fine balance, but it has been done across the world, where certain areas are being protected for locals so that locals can afford, but also locals who occupy these areas are also protected. And what should really happen is that municipalities should invest in these properties and make them attractive for investment and also tourism, so that there is a continuous investment and attraction to those regions, so that they can also accumulate some level of wealth and also generate capital.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thabi Leoka, independent economist on South Africa's unsustainable property rates regime. Join us again at the same time tomorrow for more interviews from the SAPOA Annual Convention. Until then, from me, Moik Peterson, it's goodbye.